Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is an episode for my South African subscribers because South Africa has recently introduced a two-pot retirement system and I've heard some crazy stories and people doing crazy things. So I want to explain how this new system works, but also look at when it could potentially make sense for you to access your retirement funds. If you're new here, I'm Carla. I'm a chartered accountant with an MBA and I've got 10 years of experience in the finance and investment industry. And this channel is all about helping you make smarter money choices. And also a disclaimer that nothing that I say in this video is personal, financial or tax advice. So speak to an expert if you need to. If you are a regular viewer, you would know that I love tax and I love investing. And this topic brings those two together very nicely because accessing your savings pot does have tax implications for you. But if you want to be smart with your investments, it could actually make sense. And I'm going to show you exactly why. But first, let's just understand the basics. This new amendment was signed into law in July and has become effective from September onwards. So what is the government actually trying to achieve here? Despite what people think, this is not for SARS to make tax money from you. This is because the government realized South Africans are not financially prepared for retirement and that a lot of South Africans, when they change their jobs, which then gives them access to their built-up retirement funds, extract these funds and use it. And when they come to retirement, they don't have sufficient retirement savings to maintain them. Then they become dependent on government grants, and most of the time these grants won't be sufficient for you to sustain a proper living. So this change really is to protect South Africans and make sure that they don't access their retirement funds before retirement. Why don't they want you to access it? This is something that I talk about often on my channel, but the longer money is invested, the more compounding potential it has. And the compounding potential over time is massive. So you actually don't want to be spending any of your retirement funds. The only thing that could make sense for you to do is to invest it in something else. And we will look at that in just a moment. So despite this being called the two-pot system, there are actually three pots. And I like PUP. So let's think about this in three different PUP pots. The first PUP pot is your old PUP. And that is the retirement funds that you have accumulated up to the 31st of August, 2024. And that will be governed by the old rules, which means 1/3 is paid out as a lump sum upon retirement and 2/3 is used to buy an annuity at retirement. And an annuity is basically a way to give you an income every month instead of giving you all the money so that you are potentially tempted to use all of the money and then it can't sustain you throughout your retirement. So the old pot is called the vested pot and you will still have access to that money when you change employers. So now let's look at the new rules. From the 1st of September onwards, your retirement contribution, and this refers to retirement funds in whatever form, it can be a pension fund, a provident fund or a retirement annuity, your contributions would be split into 1/3 goes towards your savings pot, and that is what I call the warmpap because this pot you will be able to access, and because warmpap is very tempted to eat, you can be quite tempted to access that and use it. And the second pot, which is 2/3 of your contributions, goes into your retirement pot, which is what I call the slap pap, because it still needs some time before it's good for you to eat it. And all of the contributions that build up in this retirement pot, you are not allowed to access until retirement. And again, this is really a way to protect you against accessing these funds and using it for something else other than retirement. And these 2/3 will pay out as an annuity when you retire, which will give you a monthly income for you to sustain your retirement. So let's go back to the 1/3 portion, which is the savings pot or the warmpap. This savings portion will be seeded by 10% of your vested or old PUP pot. So if you have accumulated 200,000 up to now in your retirement fund, 10% of that, which is 20,000 Rand, would be accessible to you through your savings pot. But this seeding amount is limited to 30,000 Rand. So imagine this is really just some of the old PUP being warmed up for you to eat. And it reduces your old pot. And going forward, it would be 1/3 of all of your contributions going in there and being accessible to you. You can access this once a year and a minimum of 2,000 Rand can be withdrawn. But it's not free money. It's actually your own money that is just being made accessible to you. But the tax implications of accessing this savings pot is quite significant. And this is something that we have to discuss. Because if you don't access this money and you leave it until retirement, you would be taxed at a lump sum rate. And as you can see here, lump sum tax rates are very favorable. And this is to encourage you not to take the money out before retirement. Because currently any amounts under 550,000 Rand would not be subject to any tax. And then between 550,000 and 700,000 would only be taxed at 18%. But if you access that money now before retirement, you would be taxed at your gross marginal rate. And that will have a significant impact on the amount, and you will get out much less after tax. Because just as an example, if you fall within the third tax bracket and you take out 30,000 Rand now, that 30,000 Rand will be taxed at 31%. So you will only get out 20,700 Rand. And if we compare that to you leaving that money in the savings pot and only paying it out in 20 years' time, and we assume it's going to grow at a 9% annual return, you will have 168,000 Rand in 20 years' time. And assuming that amount, together with all of the future contributions to the savings pot, is under 550,000, or whatever the threshold is at the time, you will pay no tax on that amount. And as you can see, that's within the lump sum tax bracket that would not be subject to any tax. So you could save out on a significant amount of tax by keeping your money in the account and only letting it pay out at retirement. And the intention is that you should really only access your savings pot in an emergency. And they wanted to prevent people from quitting their jobs to be able to access their retirement funds. So this will allow for more flexibility. But of course, the question is, would it be better for you to take that tax knock now and invest the money somewhere else where you can get a better return? And of course, I've got you covered with that calculation. So now let's get to the investment part. I love talking about investments and stock market investments. And this is specifically an interesting one because the investments of retirement funds in South Africa are regulated by a regulation called Regulation 28. It's a lot of regulation. And that means in order for a fund or an investment product to qualify as a retirement pension or provident fund, it has to comply with Regulation 28. And they set strict guidelines around what this fund is allowed to invest in. For example, a maximum of 75% is allowed to be invested in shares. A maximum of 25% is allowed to be invested in property, and a maximum of 45% is allowed to be invested in international assets. And in general, these limits are there to make sure that these funds are relatively conservative and they don't have too much equity or high risk exposure. And this is to protect the members in case of volatility, and when they retire and access these funds, that a downturn in the stock market doesn't impact them too much. But if you are a regular viewer on my channel, you know that I often encourage you to have a global stock market mindset and to ensure that you are smart about your investments and invest in markets that are outside of your home country to get more diversification. So the fact that Regulation 28 only allows for 45% foreign assets is not always that great for you. So before we look at this detail, I have to tell you that this is not personal investment advice. So please speak to an advisor or do more research yourself before you make a decision and before you act on it, because I want you to be sure that it's the right thing for you before you act on anything. So let's assume that you have access to 30,000 Rand, which was transferred from your vested pot to your savings pot, and that now is accessible to you. So we're going to map two scenarios. On the one side, you leave your funds within your savings pot, which is invested in a fund that's Regulation 28 compliant. On the other side, you extract your funds, you pay tax, and you invest it somewhere where you could potentially earn higher returns. Let's assume you have 30,000 Rand in your savings pot and you are invested in, for example, in the Signia Skeleton Balanced 70 Fund. It has returned 8.9% since inception, which was in 2013. So if we assume this average performance continues in the future, which is obviously not guaranteed, this is just an assumption, and we're projecting this for 30 years, assuming you're 35 years old now, you would have 387,000 Rand by retirement in your savings pot. So this ignores your retirement pot for now. So on the other side, let's assume that you withdraw those funds. You pay tax at the highest marginal rate, just to look at a worst case scenario of 45%. So after tax, you will have 16,500 Rand, and you will also pay a transaction fee on that. So after the 600 Rand transaction fee, you have 15,900 Rand. So now let's take that 15,900 Rand and we invested in the Signia iTrix S&P 500 ETF, which is an ETF that tracks the US market, and it is 100% equity, which makes it a higher risk investment and really is only for the long term. And as you can see, it has returned since inception 16.5%. So now we're also going to assume that the S&P 500 ETF continues to have this performance for the next 30 years, and this is definitely not guaranteed, it is just an assumption. And let's see what that would look like in 30 years' time. And after capital gains tax, because let's assume that you're not investing this amount in your tax-free savings account where you won't pay capital gains tax, it would be worth 1.2 million. So if we compare these two amounts on a chart, you will see that the S&P 500 investment would, at these assumptions, be worth significantly more compared to keeping your funds within the Regulation 28 compliant fund. And that's even after considering capital gains tax. But you will also notice on this chart that for the first 13 years, the S&P 500 investment is worth less than the Regulation 28. And this is because you had to pay tax to be able to extract those funds and invest it somewhere else. And what I'm trying to say here is that if you are close to retirement, it definitely would not make sense for you to do something like this. And you should rather just wait to access those funds when you retire. But if you are 13 or more years away from retirement, it could make sense for you to look into something like this. Because taking some of the money out, despite having to pay tax on that, but allowing yourself more global diversification could be smart. But this is really only an option if you are a long-term investor and if you are 13 or more years away from retirement. And this is not for you if you're going to be tempted to access those funds and use it for something else, because this money really is intended to be invested towards your retirement. And the longer you leave it in, the more growth it's going to get. And also please note that these calculations are based on assumptions and the returns are used are historic returns, and it's not guaranteed that these returns would be the same in future. And now I feel like I'm just listing all of the disclaimers, but I really want you to be aware of the risks because the stock market can be a volatile place. And if you need that money within the next 5 years, or you plan on accessing it within the next 5 years, it won't be smart to put it into a 100 equity investment like the S&P 500. But I have some videos that could be interesting if you want to learn more about how to be a global stock market investor or what the S&P 500 is, and also why you should be smart about fees on your investments. Have a look at these videos. But whatever you decide to do, I want to encourage you to really think longer term and think about your retirement, because you can't work forever. And if you want to be able to afford a decent retirement, you should start investing and saving towards that now, because the compounding potential of money over time is significant and it is something that everyone underestimates. But the earlier you start investing, it doesn't matter what the amount is or how wealthy you are or how old you are, the earlier you start, the better. And if you would like more videos like this, please let me know in the comments. And if you would like to see more videos like this, please subscribe to my channel.